It's wonderful to be here with each and every one of you today. My name is Brynne, and I am the Thematic lead for Bioeconomy at the World Economic Forum in Geneva. Before we dive into this exciting topic of the science behind longevity and healthy aging, I wanted to take a moment to first thank the organizers for bringing us all together here today, both the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Serbia, but also the government in the Republic of Serbia. It is, again, such a pleasure and honor to be here with each of you. For our panel today, The Science of Longevity, Expanding Health and Extending Life, we'll dive deep into the topic of really our quest for a closer coupling between longevity, the total years lived, and the total number of years lived in good quality. While there's been significant focus for decades around this topic of longevity, in the past 10 or so years, the focus has shifted a little bit from sheer quantity of years lived to quality, or how many of these years we're experiencing in good health, meaning good physical and cognitive function, as well as functional independence. Now referred to as healthspan, this term was really introduced to distinguish between longevity and really emphasizing those years that we're spending in good health. And it's gaining so much momentum recently that it is frequently referred to these days in major medical journals, but also across government health strategies. So what is all of this excitement about? And why is the topic getting so much airtime? Well, in a recent study in 2021 published in the journal Aging, they shared that only an 8-week program of diet, exercise, sleep, and relaxation reduced our biological age by more than 3 years. That's really roughly 2 weeks of a focus on diet, exercise, relaxation, sleep, etc., to reduce up to 3 years, shave 3 years off our biological age. Sign me up. Despite all of these and many other encouraging results, we still have quite a long journey ahead of us when it comes to really closing that gap between longevity and health span. For example, according to the World Health Organization's Global Health Observatory, global life expectancy reached 73.4 years in 2023. Unfortunately, the health expectancy was nearly 10 years less, coming in at 63.7 years of age. As you can imagine, this 10-year gap gives rise to significant social, economic, and healthcare burdens. And so we'll dive into that topic and so much more today. We'll hear firsthand from the experts themselves about all that we're doing to really close the gap between living a long life, but living a long and healthy life. And we'll dive deeper specifically into the role of science, technology, prevention first thinking, as well as systemic incentives that may help shift and reduce this health span gap. And with that, it is a tremendous pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists. Directly to my left, Professor Evelyne Bischof is a Swiss-trained physician and board-certified specialist in internal and longevity medicine. She serves as the medical director of the Sheba Longevity Center at Sheba Medical Center, Tel Hashemer in Israel, and also as a professor at the Shanghai University of Medicine and Health Sciences in China. Professor Dean Ho is a provost chair and head of the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the National University of Singapore. He serves as the medical director of both the N.1 Institute for Health and the Institute for Digital Medicine. And then, Dr. Alexandra Buha-Dordovic serves as an associate professor of toxicology and the vice dean for science and international cooperation at the Faculty of Pharmacy, the University of Belgrade. And finally, currently serving as the CEO of Aterna Omics Health, Dr. Slaven Stekovic is an internationally recognized longevity scientist, entrepreneur, and innovator in the life sciences, artificial intelligence, and robotics. Professor Bischof, let's turn to you. Given your work at the intersection of next-generation medical technologies and AI, where do you see the greatest opportunities for technology to really close the gap between lifespan and healthspan?
Thank you so much. Thank you also once again to the organizer for having us all here. And thank you, Dr. Stanton, because it's a very, very well-prepared panel. Actually, super excited about all the AI technology entering the field, because the field of healthspan medicine or healthy longevity medicine would not exist without AI. We've been actually using generative AI back in the year 2015, way before ChatGPT was out there. So it was a little difficult to explain what we are actually doing, and the term black box was used a lot. So now it's termed large language model and sounds more understandable and fancy because people actually interacted. So it's very important to have this AI maturity of a society in order to actually implement things. And you just mentioned this study that showed that the foundational basics are actually already having a big impact on our biological age. We kind of all know about it, but we are not able to measure it. And so when it comes to our field, technology gives us the ability, first of all, to measure. And as a physician, I mean, what we don't measure doesn't exist. And it's very important to measure the time. So biological aging clocks are booming, and that's the first technology that is very helpful for us in the clinical setting. But also technology that is really coming towards improvement of the health span and directly influencing some of the organs. There are things that improve our brain health, our brain longevity, because it's a very important organ in that setting. There are technologies that are actually helping us to have a much better picture of ourselves, so whole body MRIs now with a proper AI overlay is helpful, not only just to prevent, right? Prevention is one thing, it's very important, it's useful, but health span medicine is about health trajectories. So imagine you are 10 or years old. Back in times, you would be able to do your full omics, to do your full imaging with AI, and actually have your health trajectory, what will you have at the age of 18, 20, 25, and 40, and so on. And not only diseases, but what do you have to do in order to get your optimal performance, your optimal biological age? And that's pretty much what everybody wants. So it's not about living forever, it's really about getting your optimal performance at each of the time of your lifespan.
Excellent. Thank you for highlighting some of the key topics around optimal performance as well as biological age. How are you seeing these innovations? Because you work directly with a lot of patients. How are you seeing these innovations translate into tangible improvements in health outcomes and quality of life for your patients, particularly later in life?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So there's always this gap between innovation, good finding, and then actually the clinical practice, and especially clinical practice that will be accepted, approved, and have some sort of clinical protocols. You would not go to a cardiologist that just read about some cardiology online and give you some experimental treatment, I hope. So then, you want the same for your health span doctor. So we are working in our society to have the standards, to have certifications, board certifications, to have regular checkups of the doctors. And this is something that is slow because of the bureaucracy. But meanwhile, what people can do is already to use a lot of biomarkers of aging, and trained doctors can actually help you on that, to map yourself, to have a digital twin of yourself, and then to actually know if an intervention is actually right for you or not. Simplest example, maybe it's not good for you to sleep 8 hours. Maybe it's actually bringing you to a worse outcome. So you don't measure, you don't know. And but what we see, for example, in Sheba is the first longevity department in a public academic hospital. And we've seen patients for the past 2 years, almost 2,000 patients. We do interventions, we track them over time, 450 biomarkers of aging every 6 months. And so we see which supplement works on what for whom. How are patients responding to some of the brain trainings that are now available digitally and are really personalized? How is actually body structure changing, the muscle mass versus fat mass versus other parts? And maybe one more thing, we see through that also that healthspan medicine is not only for healthy individuals, right? We have cancer survivors, we have autoimmune disease patients, we have patients with chronic diseases at a stable term. Those are all patients that can and should be targeted by healthspan interventions.
Excellent, thank you. So what we're hearing is really the role of personalized and tailored treatments, but also the driving role of data in crafting those treatments. Thank you, Dr. Bischof. I'd now like to turn to Professor Ho. One of the things many of the people in the audience may not realize about Professor Ho is that when it comes to future-proofing health, he is actually the test subject for his own research, and he shared a lot about how adopting a simplified regimen can impact healthspan. We've already discussed how the science of aging has changed dramatically over the last several decades, but we're now really seeing a surge of interest in biohacking as people look for avenues to extend healthspan and performance. Professor Ho, first and foremost, if you could provide really just a simple definition for biohacking for those of us in the audience that aren't familiar with the term, but also, how do you see this movement shaping the future of personalized health? And what practical guidance would you offer to those eager to apply biohacking responsibly?
Well, first off, I echo my thanks to you and the organizers and everybody in the audience for being with us here today. Maybe I'll quickly define biohacking. There's many definitions, but it's the leveraging of methodologies, technologies to address an ask that we have to do everything from delaying a wheelchair in certain populations all the way to things like de-aging, which are not fully there yet. As Evelyne mentions as well, there's an important need to generate that evidence to ensure that it's actionable, durable, etc. The concept of personalizing things like health and longevity, I just want to give some real-world use cases into how we got into this space. So I'm going to give you the first use case today, which is an 80-year-old patient that we are treating right now. He has a rare cancer in Singapore. And when we think about the word personalized, I think it's important as the longevity field, as the oncology field, et cetera, continues to advance, we have to define some of these terms a little bit more deeply. So in the concept of personalization, I think we're used to the notion of using genetics to pick drugs. But then my next question is, how do you dose that drug? Right? Instead of giving the maximum dose, which is a very common thing to do, we have to realize that we're all changing over time. We're constantly and dynamically changing. And I don't think conventional medicine is built in a way that allows the treatment to evolve alongside each person. So we have this patient, and what's interesting about his case is that at maximum tolerated dose for his cancer drug, which is the standard dose given to everybody, it actually appears that he can't respond to treatment. His cancer markers get worse, and the doctors are generally wanting to switch him off to something else. It's a very logical and a very common way to address treatment. But using the digital twins we've developed for this patient, we transiently drop his dose. We reduce his dose, sometimes by quite a bit, and repeatedly, the patient flips into becoming a responder when we drop the dose. So at regular dose, no response, lower dose, response. And we were supposed to have this patient with us for up to a year if we and the patient were fortunate enough. And as of the end of last month, the patient's been with us now for over 4 years and still going strong. High quality of life, still responding to a drug doctors thought years ago he didn't respond to. So the important part about personalization for us, the important part about being optimal or precise is that all of these definitions are dynamic. Optimums cannot be fixed. Precision cannot be fixed. Personalization cannot be fixed. We are always changing over time, and so understanding our own dynamics is critical towards achieving truly personalized longevity in time. So I'll conclude with the fact that, yes, I did become my own test subject. It is an ethics board, actually double ethics board approved study, which required some added ministry level approval. And the core objective there was for me to functionally de-age the metabolism, not take a photo of my face in some algorithm that tells me I'm 5 years younger, but to actually demonstrate that the agility and resilience of my metabolism and that risk trajectory is reversed. So it's been a fascinating study. Happy to share more.
With 50 blood draws, we said, right?
Yeah, so the study is funded by one of our major health systems in Singapore. Not to get people to copy what I do. Okay, I have a fairly unique eating regimen, sleep regimen, dietary regimen, exercise regimen. I think I recognize some people in the audience in the gym from this morning, so kudos to those people. So I think that I did do about 50 blood draws in the last year, but my blood draws were not done one blood draw per week for 50 weeks. For certain weeks when I was tracking my dynamics, looking at my resilience, we were doing about 3 blood draws per week. They were not massive blood draws, so we stayed within safe limits. And what's important to note is that we have this very big drive right now to correlate longevity with resilience, which I think is important. But we have to remember, you can't prove resilience from one blood draw. Right, the whole definition of resilience is you have a system, you get a baseline, you poke the system, then you see how it responds and recovers to baseline or not. So that's why I think, as Evelyne mentioned as well, we have to move beyond the sensationalism of a camera that takes a photo of your face and says you're 10 years younger, of a single blood test that tells you how young you functionally are. You don't know functional resilience, again, with a snapshot, right? We have a saying in our team that we are stories and not snapshots. However, conventional medicine is built using a snapshot scenario. Get your blood test done during the year. Doctor says, drink less, smoke less, sleep better, exercise more. I'll see you a year later, right? That's snapshot-driven medicine, right? So the study that I ran on myself really does look at my functional metabolic resilience, and I'm happy to say my kids are pretty healthy, but my insulin is actually lower than my kids right now, right? My ability for me to restore that adaptive capacity of my metabolism, if you go online, you'll see the before photo of me. I think at one point, my risk for diabetes and metabolic disease was pretty high, right? Never did I imagine that I could really turn things back and restore a resilience that probably hasn't been around for decades.
I encourage each of you to go actually check out that photo. The word that comes to mind is unrecognizable. So as we transition now a bit more towards the technology itself, you've spoken about how AI and data-driven personalization can transform health outcomes. How do you see these technologies advancing or perhaps redefining the principles behind biohacking and self-optimization?
Yeah, I'll be quick on this one. So, as I mentioned before, we handle late-stage cancer patients all the time. And beyond dosing, we have another technology that we developed called Optimi, which takes cancer patients who are a week from hospice care, and by developing the right combination regimens, these are patients that had failed everything, failed 5 lines, 6 lines, 7 lines, and we have pulled hundreds of patients just in the Southeast Asia region back out of hospice care and into complete remissions with astounding positive and negative predictivity of this assay. So then my question is, at that stage, when you have patients that are that ill, you only have the option of real optimization, mathematical and global optimization to save them. So then the question is, what if we applied that algorithm to healthy people? Right? So when we talk about real optimization in designing supplement regimens, repurposed medication regimens, not just single agent, I think it's very important moving forward that when we develop the algorithms, we develop the wearables, develop the assays, that we are clear of what the ask is. We hear the words optimum, precision, and personalize a lot. It's time to use some of these algorithms to find global optimums to be applied to healthy individuals, because aging is barreling at us like a bullet train on steroids. Simply taking a repurposed medication, simply taking a couple supplements is like throwing candy at that train, right? So we do need to think about how we use real optimization on healthy subjects because we need something that potent in order to really de-age durably and with actual evidence. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you for that. I'd now like to turn to Professor Buha. So up to this point, we've talked about how healthspan isn't just for healthy people. We've talked about digital twins, biohacking, technological advances. But one of the angles that we haven't covered is chronic exposure and the complex interactions that ensue. Your research, Dr. Buha, focuses on the combined effects of chemical mixtures and endocrine disruptors. First off, if you could help the audience understand what are endocrine disruptors, but also how is our understanding of these complex interactions evolving, and what implications might this have for efforts to expand healthspan alongside lifespan?
Thank you, Dr. Stanton, and it's a really great pleasure for me to be here as well. So first of all, I would say that nowadays we are just much more aware how chemical exposure are really complex. So the majority of regulation that surround us is basically based on testing single chemicals. So then by testing single chemicals, we come up with some safe levels that we deem as safe in terms that we are going to be chronically exposed to these levels and they are not going to harm us. But research have shown that in reality we are never exposed to a single chemical. We are exposed to so-called chemical cocktails, toxic cocktails. So you mentioned endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are the chemicals that are basically acting like hormones in our organisms, although they are outside our organism. So these are the chemicals that we inhale or ingest via food or via various consumer products. And these chemicals produce many adverse and toxic effects in our organism. And studies have shown that these chemicals, when they are present in mixture, as they usually are, can produce and can elevate biological aging in our organism and also can increase the risk of various diseases, even if they are present in the levels that we regard as safe based on the toxicological testing that we did. And this brings us to the, let's say, new paradigm, which is exposome. And exposome is basically the totality of all exposures that we have from the moment of conception until our death. So exposome is sort of an environmental analog to genome. So to put this into perspective, I will say one sentence that really summarizes it all, and it says that genome loads the gun while the environment pulls the trigger. So our health is basically the product of both genome and exposome. And I'm sure we all know a lot about genome, but we are not very aware of exposome. So I would like to see in the future the possibility for our patients to get the results of their genome and at the same time to get the results of their exposome. And in that way, they could concentrate on the parts of their body which is under greater risk, and the intervention towards reducing the exposure to chemicals could be personalized.
Excellent, thank you for introducing us, many of us, to a new term, exposome. Continuing down that path, how does chronic exposure to pollutants influence aging and contribute to the widening health span gap that we've discussed today?
Yeah, I would say that the exposure to chemicals, especially the ones that are like real-life exposure, and that is the exposure to very low doses of mixture of chemicals, basically is adding fuel to the fire of aging. There are many researches that have shown that these chemical mixtures can produce and can elevate basically inflammation in our organism, oxidative stress, strengthening of telomerases. So all this is bringing our biological age higher. I would say that this underpins the thinking that doing everything to prevent pollution is so important, not because we want, not only because we want to preserve polar bears or sweet pandas or have a wonderful landscape, but because we want to live longer and we want to live healthier.
Thank you for making the linkage there. I think that many people don't necessarily think about, we think about pollution,
Yes.
environmental protection,
Yes.
but it's also about protecting ourselves. So I'd like to now turn to our final speaker, Dr. Stekovic. So Dr. Stekovic, as I mentioned, is the CEO of Eterna Omic Health. Dr. Stekovic, we've talked about biohacking, we've talked about exposure now to chemical mixtures. But one of the things we haven't touched on is multi-omics testing. And this is really central to Eterna Omic Health's mission. When you look across the data you are generating for individual patients and tailoring health solutions for each client, what role does longevity testing play in designing personalized interventions? And where do the main challenges still lie?
Well, I would like to start by thanking the audience for being here, because we thanked the organizers already a couple of times, and to thank taxpayers for enabling our research for the last couple of decades, because that's what has led to all the great inventions and all the great technological developments we are listening about today. When it comes to longevity, and what we do is pretty much that's the central mirror or central glass that we're looking through when it comes to the analytics of multiomics. Every single topic we touched on so far is in one way or the other looking into complex data, big data collected from human health, being genome, exposome, proteome, metabolome, and so on, and basically looking at what does this mean for the population in more traditional sense in pharmaceutical life science research, but also what we're hearing more and more actually, how is it influencing the individual? How do we define we mentioned optimal performance, but how do you define optimal performance for a 70-year-old versus a 20-year-old or 25-year-old person with different comorbidities or different aspirations in life, different psychological even predispositions in order to optimize their own health, prevent particular diseases, and just have a better life.
Great. Coming back to this idea of the topic on everyone's mind, AI, coupling that with multi-omic testing and the AI-driven data processing that you're conducting at Eterna to really optimizing patient health. For those in the audience that are less familiar, what are some of the most exciting breakthroughs that are being enabled through this coupling of multi-omic testing and AI-enabled data processing?
So, I mean, as Evelyne already mentioned, we've been using various AI systems in research and development for already more than a decade, 15 years almost. I remember when I was doing my PhD study on intermittent fasting in healthy participants, that was my first exposure to AI. I was a big opponent of AI back in the days, being a good old biochemist by training, looking at numbers and working in Excel, as everyone else does. But ultimately, when I saw the power of the analysis you get from all this complex data, the level of understanding that a human brain just wouldn't be able to comprehend in such a short period of time, and I would actually find patterns in data that you normally wouldn't see as a scientist, you would miss it. That was basically the moment I was convinced of it. The big advancement in the last couple of years, I would say, with the advancement of AI technologies, big data centers, and pretty much also opening of the industry itself to using these systems. The big advantage, though, that I've seen is switching from the typical way of thinking in data analysis. We've built clinical trials, always calculated our population sizes, how to conduct these trials. But there's been quite a bit of research in the last couple of years on so-called N=1 clinical trials, where you're actually working with a single person rather than working with big populations. And how that enables us today is actually looking every single client, every single patient as a clinical trial by itself, not as a average person in the audience, because we've all sat on a plane. The airplane seats are built to accommodate an average person. I don't know a single person that has felt comfortable in an average seat on a plane, so why would medicine be any different?
Excellent. Thank you for drawing the comparison and this idea of an individual as an entire clinical trial and bringing it back to this idea of more personalization that matters. What I'd like to do now is open up the panel to invite all of our panelists to respond. And one of the areas I'd like to start with, and this came up through threads of each of your responses, is this idea of cutting through the hype. And so one of the areas that's so hyped about right now, and we talked about, apps that will take a picture of your face and tell you what your bio age is. Great. So biohacking really has become somewhat of a movement. And there's so much buzz about it right now. But amidst all of that excitement, what does transparent communication around the benefits, limitations, and risks look like? And how can we communicate in a way that inspires and invites really trust into this conversation and really the outcomes that can translate from them? Invite anyone to chime in and please jump in.
I'll jump in quickly. I think that trust comes from two-way communication. Biohacking has had a fairly complex relationship with academia in particular. I think we know in academia, it's one of the strongest institutions in the world to generate evidence. But I think sometimes academia has challenges in communicating that evidence to the people that it tries to help. And so I was just sitting with some colleagues the other day, and we kind of noted that no matter what, biohacking is not going anywhere. And as academics, are we going to be in the ivory tower to try to say that biohacking is wrong, is fringe, or do we try to meet the community halfway? And I think it's important when I talk about two-way communication because we think of biohacking as rich people trying to live forever, right? But I want to give another use case, which is my wife, okay? So my wife is a brain and spine tumor survivor. Right? She was diagnosed very young with a malignant brain tumor when she was 39. Statistically, she was supposed to have a recurrence within the next 2 years. She ended up having a recurrence about 6 years later in her spine, all right? So my wife, based on statistics, should be resigned to recurrence. Frankly speaking, based on her tumor, she shouldn't even be here right now, okay? So for her, she has a migraine headache 9 a.m. every day until 9 p.m., constantly, every single day of the year. And we actually found out why. She basically has this permanent inflammation in her cerebrospinal fluid that's never going to go away. Okay, so she basically has this inflamed liquid in her brain all day long. Biohacking for her is getting out of bed, right? A few years ago after her first surgery, I would go days without seeing her, right? For her, it's the ability to get out of bed. It's the ability to have been able to walk again, right? Because her second recurrence was in her spine. She woke up with no feeling in her leg. Her definition is being able to live. Trust me, her definition of biohacking is not living forever. She absolutely does not want to live forever, and given in her state, she's suffering every day, right? So I think that biohacking is not going to go anywhere. Evidence still matters. The only way for this to really work is to rethink how we as academics can design trials and study outcomes while connecting with the public that has its own aspirations for what it hopes to achieve from biohacking. And this includes N equals to 1 that was mentioned. 10, 15 years ago, when we were talking about N equals to 1, we were roundly shut out. I've been told by oncologists to get out of their office, right? But progress can be made by what used to be thought of as impossible, paired with robust evidence-generating mechanisms so that academic evidence-generating mechanisms can meet the public halfway. So we actually understand who we're trying to generate that evidence for. And this is all in the ecosystem of policy, of engagement, of communication. It's not always just the technology, Right? And I think that's what's allowed us to communicate quite well with the people we're trying to help.
Great. So really standing behind this idea of evidence-generating mechanisms and meeting the public halfway. Would anyone else like to come in and respond?
I mean,
I can.
Just jump right in.
yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, Jeff Bezos was speaking at the Italian Tech Forum, and he was asked a question about where we are with the AI and the AI bubble. Longevity is in a very similar position. We are looking at clinics growing like mushrooms after the rain everywhere around the world, doing things that are evidence-based, but many things that just don't cut it. When it comes to longevity, as Jeff Bezos separated for the AI, we have financial bubbles where the markets burst and disappear, and we just see damage afterwards. But we also have technological bubbles where technology is pushed, and after it bursts, there is a residual value of the technology. And hopefully for longevity, we are in a technological, not a financial bubble at this moment. How do you ensure that you're in one or the other? It's basically by either prioritizing commercialization and profits, which sadly sometimes doesn't represent the better for the humanity, and on the other side, looking at how to actually create the value for others, even if I myself am not the one who's being successful with it.
Dr. Buha, it looked like you wanted to come in, and Evelyne, we will certainly get to you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I really like what you said about meeting the public halfway. I think that's a really important message to convey because I will give you my own example. I was for many years experimental toxicologist, so I was in a lab doing a lot of science, and then at some point I realized that this science ends up in a paper and nobody is using it. And then I realized that the science communication is as much as important as the science itself. And also, we need to incentivize scientists to be able to speak to the public, to be able to do some intervention in the field of health, to talk with their patients, and try to convey the message of the scientific work that they have done. We have tried to do something in Serbia regarding this. We had some intervention with pregnant women on the chemical exposure. Basically, we wanted to reduce the chemical exposure. And then we faced with the challenge of communicating all these risks to pregnant women. We didn't want to additionally stress them about this. So we went for advice from social scientists. And then I also want to draw your attention to this as well. We need to collaborate. We need to make multidisciplinary teams to be able to convey all these messages in the right way.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Evelyne, would you like to come in?
Just really picking up on all the great things that my colleague said. So I think, and maybe also make a little bit of a note, World Economic Forum is something that people listen to, and there are also many other stakeholders that are very credible and essential. And I think they are a very important channel. So, you know, if you go to the recordings from those type of meetings, you will actually see those specialists who you don't see on TikTok, and they will inform you about what's going on. There's a lot of things regarding semantics, right? We are still discussing, is the health span a better option to say than healthy longevity, biohacking? Don't think it matters very much, but what matters is where is your source to look, where are the standards? And for example, Healthy Longevity Medicine Society, when you Google that, you see there are standards written by experts in the field who were in the same process of a consensus, and where you can read what should and should not be in a longevity clinic. This has been implemented by UAE, for example, constitutionally. So there is no longevity clinic that calls itself longevity if they do not fulfill those standards, and more countries are joining. And I think within this bubble, there are now islands that are bringing credibility and safety to the field, because we hear about the positive things a lot and massive over-marketing. We don't hear much about the side effects, the people who die from stem cell infusions, people who are paralyzed through their, NK cell infusions, and many other things. But if you target it and you look specifically for that online, you will find horrible reports. So building evidence and communicating through scientists, not only through publications, and then in the end also looking at where are the standards within the bubbles, which do exist by now, is very helpful to guide yourself as an educated, potentially patient or client or whatever.
Excellent, thank you to each of you. One of the things that we do at the World Economic Forum is really use this platform to convey responsible, human-centered adoption of technology. One of the tools that goes such a long way there is sharing real-world examples that are relatable and perceivable by anyone, no matter where they are in the world. And so when it comes to this idea of health span and closing the gap, what real-world examples, and we've touched on already some around cancer, for instance, what real-world examples of shifting emphasis from late-stage disease care to earlier risk detection and management are you aware of? What can you share? And really the goal here is to help make this a bit more personal for those in the audience or help them see themselves in this quest for greater health span.
Should I?
Please.
Perfect. So yeah, even if you look at the Shiba Longevity Center, you will see the real-world study of healthy individuals where they are not old. They are around the age of 50. They are thinking they are healthy. They have some stable diseases, most of them. And we bring evidence through interventions and mapping them with 450 biomarkers of aging and seeing their outcomes. It's just one of the real-world examples. Another real-world example is really looking at the N1 trials. So it's only possible now because we have the ability to get so much data about one person, tetrabytes of one person, rather than some 100 gigabytes of 100 person, like it was in the past. And if you just Google N1 trial on longevity, you will see very good examples of what can be done through interventions. Recently, the oldest person alive who died at 117 was also mapped. So we didn't make a trial on her, but at least we know very well what was her phenotypes and genotype and so on. So those are some of those.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to come in here?
I'll quickly add that young adults are, we know, quite digitally savvy, tech savvy. And so at N1, so one of the institutes I run, we do have programs where we engage with and interact quite a bit with young adults. And the reason is young people are getting sicker earlier now, right? Our young adults and kids are some of the worst slept generations out there in history because they're texting their friends at 2 or 3 in the morning, poor sleep, poor metabolism, onset of other diseases. And as Evelyne mentions, right, it's when we look at prevention, there is a need now to start thinking about prevention in young people as well. And your effect size, if you start early with their habits, when they get to be 70 years old, you could see a huge shift in improved outcomes. So I think that when we think about longevity, health span, et cetera, we recognize that we have the aged population that we will help with healthy and purposeful longevity, of course, but aging begins when we're born. And so it's important to really address and tailor the right types of interventions and outreach and communication approaches with the different populations we need to serve.
Thank you so much. I have just looked at the clock, and unfortunately, we only have 90 seconds left. Please give us more time next year because there's so much more we could talk about. So for each of the panelists, I would like to ask you in a closing question, each of you 2 sentences or less, what does success look like 10 years from now, scientifically, socially, ethically, if we're successful in truly closing the health span gap? Dr. Stekovic, let's start with you.
We've mentioned already, longevity is not just for the high earners, ultra net, high worth individuals. 10 years down the line, hopefully all these technologies will be more readily available to broader audiences. The ministries, the politicians will understand the value of keeping the society healthy, and hopefully we'll all get to benefit from it.
Dr. Bischof.
I would say probably evidence-based longevity kit that is available to everybody. So we have equality and equity as well included. Also, when it comes to social aspect, maybe to think about more active life for elderly people. And at the end, I would say that we need to add years to our life, but at the same time, we need to add life to our years. So that would be like an evidence-based longevity that we stream for.
Excellent.
I'd say that conventional, traditional trial designs change the world. saved lives, made medicine possible and accessible for a big chunk of our earth. But I think that with the longevity field, there is merit to reimagining clinical trial design, whether it's N equals to 1. This is our chance, right? This is our chance to do things and try things a little bit differently because the person we are serving is not the same type of person. It's not always a sick patient, it's a healthy person. If we think 20 years from now in our trial designs, everything looks exactly the same as how they've been done for the last 100 years, I think it will have been a pity. So I think biggest one is to recalibrate how we develop therapies and trial diagnostics. There's definite room for clinical trial design innovation.
Excellent. Professor Bischof.
I would love to see in 10 years accessibility for everybody for a no cost or very low cost own digital twin that will be able to constantly get the data from the exposome, meaning, you know, sensors in your home, in your residence buildings, in your apartment, in your bed, and also a very good mapping of yourself constantly on an ongoing base, and then to fuel that in and help to develop AI-based drugs that can be targeted for a specific person, for the specific need, be it an illness, be it just optimization, be it some sort of other functional treatment.
Excellent. So overhauling not only the way that we're testing, but the way that the drugs are personalized and develop themselves given the tools at our disposal. So now for my 10-second closing, because we are already over time. What we've heard today is that longevity is not only about adding years to life, but about adding life to years. If we succeed here, the prize is enormous. Healthier societies, more productive economies. Really a vision of aging that celebrates possibility rather than decline. Thank you to each of our esteemed panelists for such an inspiring discussion, and thank you to each of you for spending your morning with us. It's been a pleasure.